Tuning into another edition of Outside the Shop with me, your host, Daryl D. Lane, as always, where I get to talk about everything that I normally don't get to talk about my regular sports podcast, Barbershop Sports Talk, which you guys can all find on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcast from. I did a podcast last night with my good friend Ben Karen, host of the Sports Father podcast. We dived into a lot of stuff. NFL draft rankings. He gave me some grades on that. We also did a little bit of recap of March Madness, and we talked about some Heisman odds and the best coaches in college football under the age of 45. We talked about what the 49ers should do with the third overall pick. Justin Fields, how he's been disrespecting kind of the whole Kyle Shanahan development, what's going on there in San Francisco, and how it all affects Jimmy Garoppolo. So check that podcast out. And again, you can find that on Spotify, iTunes, all your podcasting platforms. I will release that. I released it actually already, but I'll put it on Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, tomorrow morning / afternoon. Also, thank everybody who's tuning in via Twitter / Periscope. Share and like this program. So here's what we got today. More Deshaun Watson news, NFL draft gems, and Kevin Durant and Draymond Green. They did a podcast. For those of you who don't know, Kevin Durant does his own podcast, The Etceteras, and Draymond Green was a guest. So first, let's start with this. So Deshaun Watson, the women, they were filing under Jane Doe, so they were remaining anonymous. I believe the judges just announced that the women, to keep their suit, they have to file under their real names, which is an interesting development now in this story where these women are going to have to attach their names, and they can't hide under the name Jane Doe. Like, we're going to know who these women are. We're going to kind of get a view of who they are. Like, who are these people that are saying things about Deshaun Watson? I was wondering, do I think it's fair or foul? I understand why, if you are able to file anonymously for protection purposes, but I do think since Deshaun Watson, he's already in the public eye, his name's kind of being dragged through the mud. People know who he is. I mean, you could say in an equal society, it's only fair that people kind of know who they are. So I kind of do understand that. Now, I do want to get to this, which I also found not great in Deshaun's favor when you look at this whole thing. So his lawyer, Rusty Hardin, admitted that there were consensual encounters with the massage therapist, but says Watson never coerced or used his position as a public figure / celebrity to violate rules of consent. Now, when I say this, here's the big thing to pay attention to, folks. Consensual encounter. So basically what that means is he was scrolling through Instagram, asking them to massage him in hopes that those massages would turn into sexual encounters, right? That they would turn into sexual encounters. Now, it becomes a he said, she said thing. Now it's looking at he said versus she 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 said again, all the way 20 times around how many women we have now. So to me, this does not look good with Deshaun because like I said, at the very least, it looks like the dude was being creepy. Inviting women over, then be like, hey, can we have the massage? But with the happy ending, just not good stuff. And I think stuff like this, it puts Deshaun Watson, like, just forget about the legal stuff, the suit and all that, but it puts him closer to not being able to play this NFL season and maybe being put on the commissioner's exempt list, because this just looks bad and it's tarnishing, the reputation of the league. It is not good business. So, and I was talking to a couple people, and I've heard people say this, and I want people to comment on this. Will Deshaun Watson ever play again? Is it possible, like, he can play again? Like, when will we see Deshaun Watson on the football field? I want people to comment on that because I think that's interesting. Now, next up, I want to go to this in terms of the NFL draft. So Bleacher Report posted this about the NFL draft. So a lot of times with the draft, we get focused on who are the first round picks, who's going number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, et cetera, all the way in the first round. But we don't talk about the second round picks, the third round picks, the fourth round picks, like somebody who's on TV a lot, right? Shannon Sharp. Football Hall of Famer. He was a 7th round pick. Tom Brady, the GOAT, greatest quarterback of all time. He was a 6th round pick. Richard Sherman, one of the best cornerbacks of his generation, was a 5th round pick. I think Camp Chancellor was like a 3rd round pick. Russell Wilson was a 3rd round pick. The greats of this game are not all drafted in the first round, ladies and gentlemen. They're not all drafted in the first round. So Bleacher Report did this, and they talked about players who weren't drafted in the first round the last 5 years. Derrick Henry was drafted 45th overall. Eddie Jackson was drafted 112th overall. Xavier Howard was drafted 38th overall. Aaron Jones was drafted 182nd overall. Orlando Brown was drafted 83rd overall. George Kittle was drafted 146th overall. Mike Thomas was drafted 47th overall. Alvin Kamara was drafted 67th overall. Tyreek Hill was drafted 165th overall. And Dak Prescott was drafted 135th overall. So you have Derrick Henry, best running back in the NFL. He was the 45th pick, right? Derrick Henry's the best running back in the NFL right now. Tyreek Hill's arguably the best wide receiver. He was the 165th pick. Alvin Kamara, you could argue he's the best running back in the NFL. 67th pick, Michael Thomas. You could argue the last few years he's been the best wide receiver, not this year, but the year prior when he was dynamic for the New Orleans Saints. He was a 47th pick. George Kittle, arguably the best tight end in all of football. Like I said, 146th pick. You have Xavier Howard. He led the NFL interceptions. He had about 8. He was the 38th pick. So you can find guys. You can find dudes late in the draft. You can find these gems. So I have some of my guys who I think can be gems in this draft class. So De'Ami Brown, wide receiver out of North Carolina. I really like him. He has all the physical attributes. He's good after the catch. I could see him kind of end up being like a Devontae Smith type of guy. I think he's a guy who could not be drafted in the first round that could end up being a stud. You have guys like Walker Little, who's a phenomenal left tackle, but did not play the last couple of years. You have Richard LeCounte out of Georgia. I really like him. He's a hard hitter. There's Quinnen Mires, Wisconsin Whitewater, Division III school. Chuba Hubbard. I just did a draft profile about this guy. Check that on YouTube if you want to learn more about Chuba Hubbard. Oklahoma State. I think he could be a Le'Veon Bell type. You have Jabril Cox. To me, he's a guy that could be a chess piece all over the football field. You can do a bunch of different things with a guy like him. He reminds me of, and I'm forgetting his name right now, one of the linebackers for New England, not Dante Hightower. Jamie Collins. He reminds me of Jamie Collins. Remember how good Jamie Collins was for a while with Bill Belichick and the Patriots. Asante Samuel Jr. out of Florida State, cornerback. I think he could be pretty good. Kellen Mond. He could be the Dak Prescott. Texas A&M. Kellen Mond can play. Brady Christian out of BYU, tackle, explosive, like his power or strength, a little bit undersized, but he's a road grader. Maybe he could eventually play guard, and he could be pretty good. Trey Sermon out of Ohio State. Really dominant college football semifinal game against Clemson and a really dominant Big Ten championship game against Northwestern. You have Javonte Williams, a monster of a running back out of the backfield, just runs people over like they're children. He just blesses them every time he's on the field. You have Wyatt Hubbard, Kansas State pass rusher. I like his speed. I like his explosiveness. You have Tyler Shelvin, who's a 350-pound athletic nose tackle that could do some things. And you have Rondell Moore, one of my favorites. He's had an injury history, but he's a monster. Remember, folks, when Purdue beat Ohio State in a night game, Rondell Moore was the best player on that field. So these are all guys that I could see not being drafted in the first round that could be stars in the NFL, all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber players, guys that are top 5 in their position, guys that we know by name, right? So just take a look out for those specific names. So Draymond Green came on Kevin Durant's podcast, The Etceteras, and during that podcast, they talked about a lot of stuff, and I have all this written down. So they got into, and guys, check out this podcast. Just type in Etceteras wherever you get your podcast. After, of course, you listen to mine. But they could talk about a lot of good stuff. So first of all, what they delved into was this. They talked about how players don't talk crap anymore on the court. How players are too nice to each other. They blame the AAU circuit. Everybody knows each other. And I thought a point Kevin Durant and Draymond were trying to make was Kevin Durant and Draymond kind of knew each other. Their era of players kind of grew up in the AAU circuit, but, you know, they kind of still had that competitiveness, which if you go back a further generation, Michael Jordan and Kobe's guys, they would say, no, they didn't. But I think that was really interesting. Also, they talk about how the Warriors kind of made teams shoot threes. When the Warriors won their first championship, I believe in like 2017, they were the number 1 3-point shooting team or the number 2 3-point shooting team. And then you go next year in the year 2018, and they're like number 17th in shooting threes. And Draymond Green talks about everybody's trying to do what we do, but they forget, like, we have Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry. And Kevin Durant's one of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA. Steph Curry can hit a mid-range shot. Klay Thompson can post you up, and Klay Thompson can hit a mid-range shot. So it's not like we don't use all areas of the court. He's like, we're good basketball players, which I think is always really important because people talk about three-point shot, spread, pick, and roll. But there's more to that makes Golden State special. First of all, they have the talent, they have the horses, they have the dogs. But second of all, you know, they're versatile. They just don't shoot threes. There's much more to their game. Kevin Durant's a bucket from anywhere on the court. Same with Steph Curry, same with Klay Thompson. And you can talk about guys like Sean Livingston, mid-range shooter. Then you go to this. They also talked about the lull of being a team like the Warriors where, you know, you have to struggle to get up for teams. And Draymond talked about the game within the game. Sometimes he talked about how they go through stretches where it's like, okay, you know what? We're going to put together a playoff run right now in the regular season for these 10 to 15 games and show people what we really are. And they talked about a lot, like a regular workplace. Sometimes you go into work, sometimes you go into school, sometimes you go in whatever the environment you're going into, and you just don't feel it that day. You don't feel it that day. Sometimes they go to work and they're like, yeah, you know, it's a little mundane, it's a little tedious. we'll do it when we do it. And that just happens. Like, you can't get up for every single day. I know we all think you need to get up for every single day, but, they're just like us. So I thought that was really interesting, too. They also talked about when Draymond Green called Kevin Durant crying when the Warriors lost the finals. And they also talked about the recruitment of Kevin Durant. Now, first of all, Kevin Durant tried to say, and I thought this was very funny, he's like, I wasn't hanging out with Draymond Green during the Western Conference Finals, because obviously Kevin Durant and Draymond, they were texting that whole season. He's like, Draymond Green wasn't at my house. He's like, who y'all think I am? And I'm like, well, Kevin Durant, people think you're a snake. KD, people think you're a snake, so maybe they do who you are. But I thought that was interesting. They kind of put that to bed, that, they weren't all buddy-buddy when the Western Conference Finals was going on. Also, what they talked about is Draymond Green said he did not cry. He said it was overblown. He said it was a media blowing it out of proportion, with him crying to Kevin Durant after LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love went to Golden State at Oracle Arena and beat them in Game 7. And the Warriors got messaged Kevin Durant. Draymond Green said it was more like a text. And he's like, hey, you trying to come? And then KD's like, yeah. I don't know if that's the case. I think maybe Draymond's downplaying a little bit more than it was. It could have been highly emotional. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I thought that was cool too. And they talked about when Draymond Green called Kevin Durant the B word. I did not like this part. I thought Kevin Durant, he never really acknowledged that he called him the B word, even though that we all know that Draymond Green did call Kevin that word. But he swore a lot. He said a bunch of other profanities that aren't suited for children. And I thought it was interesting how he said, I was the only one who could fix this. He said, Steve Kerr and Bob Myers, he's like, they suspended me. It was all wrong. And they talked about how the media blew that out of proportion. And I disagree with that, because you know what? We all knew Kevin Durant that year, that he was going to leave potentially. Draymond even talked about this in All the Smoke, how he wasn't the same. He wasn't happy, which he didn't mention on that podcast. So I thought that was a tad bit just disingenuous myself. But overall, I do want to say this. I love the interview. Love KD's podcast. Love Draymond Green coming in. Draymond Green is funny, and Draymond Green's talking about a career in media. Just imagine Draymond Green, guys, being the Charles Barkley, the new Charles Barkley, the guy that talks all the crap. Draymond Green, really funny. Listen, thank you, everybody, for tuning into this edition of Outside the Shop. On the description below, my top 15 interior defensive linemen in this upcoming draft class. Coming up soon is going to be my top 27 defensive ends. So check that out. I'm just done. I'm writing up the linebackers right now as well. Share this. Whichever platform you're listening to. Also, check out the podcast that I just released. Have a great day, everybody, and God bless.